I was talking to a neighbor and I said, my husband's deployed and I should be hearing from him. And her son was deployed and she was supposed to be hearing from him. So I ran home and I decided I wasn't going to call Brian's mom until, because I had to talk to her about some things until I'd heard from him. And so I'd kind of been avoiding her. She'd messaged me a few times. And then suddenly she called me right after I put the kids to bed that night and said, "Hey, did you see the news flash that came across the phone?" And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" She goes, "I just had a news flash come across that there was an attack on the Mali Niger border on a group of SF guys." And it's like, I didn't think, I just spoke and I was like, that's Brian's team. Brian's dead.
Today I'm talking with Michele Black. She is the wife of Sergeant First Class Black that passed away during the Tongo Tongo incident that took place in Niger back in 2017. I remember vividly where I was. I was an instructor over at the 18 Charlie Committee, sitting behind a computer and listening to this unfold, right? But we know our perspective from the military side. I just wanted to bring her on so she can tell her story, the cover up, and everything that her and her family went through. With all that said, Michele, welcome to the show. I appreciate you taking the time to actually come out and speak to me on camera about this.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to speak, not just to the military community, but specifically, to someone who's prior third group and was there during the whole incident. So
Yeah,
it's a great perspective to hear as well.
yeah. And again, a third group between us and fifth group, right? We refer to ourselves as one of the combat groups, right? So now we'll get into how you guys met and how your stay at Fort Bragg was and how all that worked out for you guys, right? So now, how did you and Brian meet?
Um, so I was living in Mammoth Lakes, which is a ski area in California. I was a snowboard instructor and actually just ran into him at church one night. I thought he was kind of weird, super awkward dude. and But then, he started coming over to my house all the time, just hanging out. And honestly, I taught him to crochet. And yeah, so it's like, well, shoot, if this guy's gonna sit here and crochet with me while all the other guys are, because I had a big house with girls, it's all women. And so normally, all the guys would be hanging out, flirting with the girls, whatever, watching movies or whatever. And I would just be off doing my own thing. And I thought, well, if he's gonna waste his time crocheting, then, it's not too bad. So we started doing a lot of hiking, and yeah, before we knew it, we were engaged. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. That's now was he now were you guys married prior to him coming in the military, or was he talking about military at that point, or how did that transpire? Like him deciding to enlist in the military.
So he grew up. His dad was an officer in the Marines. So he definitely was interested in one day being a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret. He talked about it, but no, he wasn't in. He'd actually just graduated from college when he ended up in Mammoth, and he was playing online poker for a living. So that's kind of what he was doing, and he was making good money at it. And then he was kind of burned out playing online and just spending all day at home, especially once we had kids and all of that. And so he was looking to get out of the house. And then 2008 hit, and you just couldn't get a job anywhere. So he was like, this is the perfect opportunity. And I'm kind of hitting an age where I'm running out of time. So if I'm going to go in, now's the time. So I think he was, I want to say 27 or 28 at the time.
Mhm.
And that's when he joined. We'd been married about, I want to say 3 or 4 years when he joined.
Gotcha.
So,
Now, how was that for you? Like leading up to that point, did you know anything about the military? Were you excited? Were you fearful, or were you like, how are you feeling?
I didn't know anything about the military at all. My family, no one that I was aware of had really served. I mean, my grandpa, I think, had been in the Air Force temporarily, like for a very short term when him and my grandma first met. But
Yeah.
And he didn't. He was the guy who painted numbers on planes. You know what I mean? So I knew nothing about the military. So for me, I was pretty nervous, but at the same time, I was excited to get out and move around. I'd mainly been on the West Coast. I knew we'd be moving all over. But I was also so busy with kids that at that point, it didn't matter what we did. Was already full time just dealing with a kid on the autism spectrum and an infant. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because I always say that like we see it from our perspective as far as we're gone all the time, but nobody really knows what the spouses deal with, right? Which is an entire different beast within itself, right? So now he joins the military, probably the 18 X-ray contract, because he came straight into SF, and you guys are here at Fort Bragg. How was that transition itself? Did you like it here? Did you not so much, or were you ready to go back to out west? Like, how was that for you guys?
well, it was interesting because he wanted to go straight in, but they were telling him when he was getting recruited that there wasn't the X-ray program or any of that. So he ended up going in initially as just a standard medic, so a 68 whiskey.
Oh, okay.
And so we went to Colorado for a year. And but the minute we got there, he goes, "Now I'm going to train and go to SFAS." And I was like, he got bored and was like, "Okay, this is what I'm doing." So I was like, "Wow, okay, that's a big transition." So we
Yeah.
were in Colorado for a year when he went to SFAS, passed, came home, and then his uh, what would you call it, like cash at
Mhm.
the time, combat support hospital, let him just go straight over. And so we were at Bragg within 18 months of us being in Colorado. So it was a pretty quick transition, even though he didn't go straight in as, an x-ray.
Yeah, I love the
So
determination.
yeah, it was pretty crazy. So the training was intense just the minute he decided he was going to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was insane to watch him do. So it was fun. Yeah, but going to Bragg, I mean, it was like moving to another world, from California and Washington State, because that's kind of where we lived our first few years of marriage, to Fayetteville, North Carolina. I mean, it took me a while. So for
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Now, before we get into you guys getting the third group, and him getting the second battalion and Stone to do work, um, what would you want people to know about Song First Class Black? Like, what type of man was he? Like, what type of father was he? Like, just please share with us.
Um, Gosh, Brian was, he was funny. He was one of those people who was very he came across as stoic. He could say things very straight faced,
Mhm.
but he was brilliant. So you had to get to know him before you realized he was joking, otherwise you'd be insulted by some of the things he was saying, for sure. But just I mean, he definitely fit into the SF community. Wasn't intimidated by anyone, and he had this deep monotone. So he'd walk in. I think the first day he went to his team, he walked in, and they were going to show him the team room, and he walked in as the junior medic, and he looks around, and then he turned to the lead medic and said, "You need to get your stuff in order. This place is a mess." So yeah, he was a little bit of an intimidating figure, and but with me and the kids, totally different. He was absolutely a sweetheart. I remember he was always um, just really patient with the kids, of course, and loved them. I have all these pictures of them or videos of them wrestling, and him singing to them. And anyway, just he was a great husband and father. Just yeah, really
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, because typically as the new guy, you walk into the team room, you don't really say much. So that's awesome that he was able to step in there and immediately started giving his opinion. That's awesome.
Yeah, he had an issue with not caring what your rank was or where you were. If he felt something needed to be said, he would say it, which honestly, probably long term wouldn't have played out very well for him anyway. In this, I think he just thought, I'll get in to SF and give my opinion, and it'll go over or it won't, and
Yeah.
oh well. So,
Now, around what time did you guys get to third group? Around what year?
so we got to Fayetteville for him to start the Q course in 2012, and he graduated in 2015.
I got you. So around 2015, then you guys got to uh, second battalion, third group, because November of 2015, I went to SWIC. I went to the schoolhouse as an instructor, so we probably missed each other. Dad and I grew up in first battalion, like I mentioned, and then he grew up in second battalion. So how was third group for you guys? How was the welcoming? Like, how did you feel up to this point? You know, he graduated the Q course. He's now a Green Beret. You're a Green Beret spouse. Like, how was everything going leading up to?
Oh, it was great. At first he was on a B team. So he graduated in April 2015 and pretty much instantly went to Afghanistan. So right before he went to Afghanistan, they had some sort of party, and I went and met all these people, and they were a lot of fun.
Mhm.
So he went over to Afghanistan, came back, I want to say in October or something. It was fairly short deployment. He was just there at the tail end of a deployment of a B team, I guess, and then came home and was recruited by ODA 3212, and he went straight to Ranger School. So then he was gone for 3 months, came home, and he was home a month, and they deployed to Niger the first time.
Yeah,
And so right before then, they had kind of a party for him. So then I met that whole group of, wives and who he was deploying with, and they were, amazing.
yeah,
So yeah, the welcome was great.
yeah. Now, for the first trip to Afghanistan, from a spouse perspective, like, how was that? Like, how is it? Like, because again, I know from the Green Beret perspective, being gone and focusing on the job and locking everything up in a box until we either get back to fire base and we pick up the phone and we talk to the kids and the spouse. But from a spouse perspective, like, what are you guys going through when you're stateside and husband is removed and you don't know what's going on or what's taking place down there?
Um, it depends. I imagine it depends on what your deal is with your kids. I
Mhm.
know for me, having a kid who was autistic, he was so crazy and so full time that by the time I finally got the kids in bed and things relaxed every night, it was like I had just 4 hours before or 3 hours before I had to go to bed, get up and do it all over again. And
Yeah.
so it was pretty exhausting. But the nice thing about Afghanistan was right about then was when Brian would call, and we could email, FaceTime, whatever. So just the infrastructure that was already built in the area he was deploying to in Afghanistan was great.
Mhm.
That changed in Niger because he was living in a Connex in the middle of the
Yeah.
desert. So
Yeah.
I might hear from him once a month.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that dynamic changed.
Yeah. So now leading to the Niger trip, 2017, right? That was his first time over there, or had they had multiple trips to Africa prior to 2017?
Um, I think the team had been, well, no, because I believe it was handed over right around that time from 10th group. So
Yeah.
they were just starting up working in Niger, in
Yeah.
Africa. Their group
Yeah.
was. So Brian did the 2016 deployment, came home, and then did the 2017 deployment in which he was killed.
Gotcha. So 2016, did they go to the same area in 2017, or was it a different area of operation?
No, he was in Maradi, Niger, the first deployment in 2016, and that was, I believe, more southeast. So it was
Gotcha.
closer to the Nigerian border.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, because while Afghanistan was ramping up or was going on, we actually switched our battle space to just Afghanistan, and we actually gave Africa to 10th Group. And then once Afghanistan started to die down, we it's weird because as a group, we always joke around that we're chasing the next fight. We're chasing the next fight.
Mhm.
So whenever Afghanistan died down, Like us as SF dudes, we're like, okay, well, where's the next fight gonna be? Oh, maybe in Africa. All right, 10th group, like, forget you, give us Africa back, because we were anticipating that being the next conflict. So around
Yeah.
2016, we took Africa back from 10th group, and we started doing operations over there. Now that first Niger trip, how was that for you? Was that similar to your Afghanistan trips? Was that a little bit more stressful, or was it anything to worry about there?
I wasn't stressed. Of course, like hindsight, right?
Mhm.
He would always tell me, well, Niger's a lot more safe than
Yeah.
Africa, or I mean, Afghanistan, like, and then we only lose so many soldiers, and the odds of me dying on my way to work are higher than the odds of me dying. He was a numbers guy, all about statistics. So he'd, sell me that. So, and he would tell me that Maradi was completely safe. And he told me the same of, Wallam, where he ended up the next year. So, but then again, and I didn't think it through before that he had told me at one point Maradi was so quiet that they actually were trying to figure out where would be a better place for them to um, work in the next deployment, where there was more activity and where they'd be of more use. So, of course, the following deployment would be, I should have been more concerned. And I was, but that was more almost like a premonition that I had, just a high anxiety. It had nothing to do with what I knew. It wasn't a knowledge thing. It was just a gut feeling. But when he went to Maradi, I I wasn't nervous at all, but I didn't get to talk to him very much. So when he first left, he was gone for probably a month before I even heard from him. So that was the hard part. Was Well, he was cheap, so he didn't like expensive phones. So of course, he had something called an Alcatel, and so if it doesn't work well in the United States, it's probably not going to work, very well in the middle of nowhere, Africa, and it didn't.
Yeah.
So he was having to borrow LaDavid's phone actually to call me. And so then when I try and call him back, I'd call that number and I'd get LaDavid, which was hilarious. So I was confused. LaDavid was confused, but Brian knew what was going on. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay. Um, but yeah, so I'd only hear from him every once in a great while.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha. Now, leading up to the 2017 deployment, because as everything was developing, one of the things that they threw out there was that the ODA was not as well trained, or they were a junior team and they were not as trained. But me being on that side, like, I know prior to us going anywhere, we do your pre-mission training, whether that's in Texas or Louisiana. And then, of course, we as a team, we always train leading up to whatever deployment we're getting ready to gear for, because again, we have the different cycles where you know um, there's going to be a time where it's just months on end of just training and getting ready for that deployment. Now, leading up to that deployment, was he, I'm sure because you live with them, a lot of late nights, a lot of ranges, just prepping for that actual deployment.
yeah, no, there was a ton of training. I mean, as you know, they they come home. We have maybe a month that's just family time, right? We get like to go on a vacation, and he's got all this leave. But uh, besides that, there's probably a solid 3 months of training. And he might actually be absent for a full 1 month of training, which in this case, it was Jade Helm, which was an unconventional warfare training exercise. So really, it wasn't what they should have been doing. But to say that they weren't well trained or they were a junior team is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple new guys on the team, which is typical. Um, but that doesn't mean that they weren't well trained. And
Yeah.
when you look at, all the different badges, I mean, most of the guys on the team had Rangers tabs.
Hmm.
Several of them had been on multiple combat deployments, been in combat multiple times. One of them has been shot, I think, 3 or 5 times
Yeah.
in the past in combat situations. So this wasn't a junior team. Yes, there were junior members on the team. They were new, but they were, as you know, you you don't hear that when, say, an average guy in the army goes over is in combat and whatever. But then when you're talking about SF, their training on top of just regular army is, an extra 2 to 5 years. So, I mean, yeah. And also they're saying that while not recognizing the fact that they didn't have a record of the 2016 deployment because the travel office didn't bother issuing orders. So a lot of these guys had deployments on their belt that were never recognized. I just got Brian's 2016 deployment got finally listed in his records.
Yeah.
So it was easy for them to claim these guys weren't trained, but they were.
Oh
And
yeah.
then the other part,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and then the Jade Helm training is interesting because when they make the point that the guys didn't have the proper training, well, then why was nobody held accountable for giving them the wrong training? Because that doesn't fall on the team members themselves. That would fall on the battalion and the group commander who sign off on all the training and then validate their training before they're allowed to operate in theater. And none of them were punished in the end.
Yeah.
So,
And it's a bunch of crap, just again, having been in that space, it's a bunch of crap, right? Because PMT or Jade Helm or, like all that is a validation exercise, right? Because leading up to that point, there's a bunch of training that the guys are doing year round, right? There's a bunch of training that these guys are doing year round. And then based on what the battalion or the company has going on, they might go to an exercise like an NTC or a JRTC just to validate, certain aspect of training. But leading up to that point, like guys are training their butts off. That's one thing we as SF guys like to do is, we like to move, shoot, communicate, medicate. That's just part of our daily lives, right? So we train all that stuff. So at any given time, we can go execute. And again, when I had my team as a team sergeant in the first battalion, like I had, like 4 or 5 junior guys that were coming in from the Q course. And then I had my senior guys who their job is to mentor the younger guys. Right. And you have me as the team sergeant. I'm the most, senior enlisted guy. Right. So it's like there's no such thing as one, a full team. And then there's no such thing as a fully senior team, because if there is, the leadership is going to take that senior team and oftentimes they'll, spread the love throughout the entire company to make sure some of the other teams have senior team members. Right. So when I
yeah.
heard that going around, I was like, wait, like, no, that's not how it works. Right. And to say that those guys weren't trained, I can tell you right now, everybody was pissed because as Green Berets, that's something that we eat, live, and like it's training. Like we don't sit around the team room and not do anything. If there's time and we don't have anything going on, we're going to the range. Right? We're going to the
Yeah.
range. We're working on SOPs. We're doing cross training. So like we're always doing that type of stuff because it's the job, right? Now leading to the 2017 deployment, how are you feeling? Like he gets ready to go, or are you like, hey, this is just another deployment? Like talk me through how that went down.
Yeah, it was interesting because Brian was actually in the spring talking about getting out of the military. And then he decided, no, I think I want to stay in longer. I really do enjoy SF. I think he was frustrated with a lot of the politics of it, but other than that, he liked doing it. So he's like, I'm going to do one more stint and whatever. So he re-signed actually in April that year. And so for some reason, we come up to August when he's getting ready to deploy, and I just start feeling it, which I never did before. Just a lot of anxiety about him leaving. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. But the day I dropped him off at Fayetteville Regional, I just was like, this doesn't feel right. But I mean, what do you do? Like
Yeah.
you don't you don't walk away. So, it's it's what it is. So he gets on the airplane, and I mean that stress just built over the course of, I mean, it was I think 5 weeks in when the incident happened. So over the course of the next 5 weeks, I would constantly, we had this window in our kitchen that looked over our front yard to our driveway. And I would catch, like, subconsciously, I would walk over and look at that window and look for people in uniform. And I didn't know why. And then I had one day, about probably 3 or 4 days before the incident occurred, when my youngest son came up to me, and I think he was getting ready for bed. And he told me, Mom, Dad's not coming home this time, is he? And I don't know what made him think that, but I panicked. And it's like at that moment, I knew, like, okay, this is, I don't know. I knew he wasn't going to come home. But of course, I lied to Isaac and said, no, of course he's coming home. And, you just got to pray. And at that point, you realize, like, I'm starting to step into the reality of, if he doesn't come home and maybe he's not. And what is that? You know what I mean? What does that look like? So you start making plans, but trying to believe that if you don't say it out loud, it won't happen. Right.
Yeah.
So,
And that's something that we, as the service members, as the guys fighting, that's something that we'll never be able to experience, right? Like, we can't relate to what you guys deal with on the home front. Just that constant, thought in the back of your mind. Like, that's something that I know I never really thought of, right? Because I can't even begin to imagine what that feeling is like. And to, have it, for 5 weeks, and then hearing that from your son, that's, yeah, I yeah, we definitely need to give you guys more credit than we do. And now that I'm retired and I'm home, and it's like, Jesus Christ, man, like, I can't even begin to relate to what, you guys go through on the home front. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
just horrible. Now, Lee, doing that 5 weeks, were you guys able to speak on the phone? Was he able to, like, did you guys hear from him? Like, but you still had
Oh,
that
yeah.
feeling?
We did. I didn't mention it to him. I don't know. Sometimes I think maybe he had the same feeling, because there were some weird things afterwards, that just didn't make sense. Like, he had taken his bonus from when he signed in April and put it all into a crypto,
Hmm.
which is great, especially considering how hard it is to get into those accounts.
Yeah,
And so if you lose the seed codes or whatever, you lose all the money.
yeah,
And so when he died, I was going through one of his notebooks, and I get all this stuff back, and I was just looking through his writing, because he spoke Arabic and wrote in Arabic. And so I was going through it, and I flipped to the back, and he had taken one piece of paper and written the seed code on it to his account. But he didn't write account or waves or whatever the crypto was. He just wrote like 5 consecutive words, assuming I would figure it out. And then circled it with a permanent marker and wrote my name with an
mhm,
exclamation point. Like it was something I was meant to find.
yeah,
It was very, like, strange and eerie.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So now, the day of, please, if you can talk me through that day, what you were doing, how everything developed, and again, if however, wherever you want to take it, I'm all ears.
Yeah, so I was really nervous. I knew he was going out on a mission, and he told me he'd call me when he was done. But it was supposed to be, a quick mission. He just told me, we're going out in the morning on another mission. I'll call you when I get back. We're going to go up to Niamey, and then I'll call you when we get to the capital. I was like, okay, whatever. Um, and then it just had been too long. I just had this feeling like it's been too long. And I remember it was an afternoon, and I was talking to a neighbor, and I said, my husband's deployed and I should be hearing from him. And her son was deployed and she was supposed to be hearing from him. So I ran home, and I decided I wasn't going to call Brian's mom until, because I had to talk to her about some things, until I'd heard from him. And so I'd kind of been avoiding her. She'd messaged me a few times. And then suddenly she called me right after I put the kids to bed that night and said, "Hey, did you see the news flash that came across the phone?" And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" She goes, "I just had a news flash come across that there was an attack on the Mali Niger border on a group of SF guys." And it's like, I didn't think, I just spoke and I was like, "That's Brian's team. Brian's dead." And then it's like, I stopped and I was like, well, and because then she's like, "We don't know that." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. We don't know that." But it's like I knew that he was right there up near the Mali Niger border, and that was kind of the region he was working in. And I mean, how many teams are operating up there? They're so thinly spread across the continent. There wasn't going to be another team working in the Mali Niger border. So for me, that's when I knew. Then I called a few other people. I called some of the women from the team, and they had heard from their husbands, and they told me they had heard from their husbands. Their husbands had called and said, "I'm fine, but things went really bad." And so I knew if they've heard from their husbands and I haven't heard from Brian, or someone calling me to say he's in the hospital or something, then he's dead. And they're requiring me to wait for a knock. So that's basically what I did. I went down and just pretended like it was a normal night. And then I sat on my stairs and waited for someone. My stairs faced my front door and just waited until the car pulled up. And fortunately, my kids were asleep.
Yeah. And eventually the cars did come. How was that? So you're sitting there waiting, like, God, man. Again, like I've lost teammates, so I know the rage aspect of it from a NSF perspective, but from a spouse aspect of it, like, what are you feeling at this point? Like,
I think it's like shock. You almost, I think it's like where you have to step outside yourself and you're numb, so you almost disassociate to a degree, because you know it has to happen, and you're trying not to feel what you know you're going to have to feel. And so they come and knock on the door, and I told them, "I already know what you have to say. It's okay." But it's like they have to say it. And when they say it, everything changes. So they came in and they gave me their spiel, and it was just like each word they said was like having a brick thrown at you. It's just knocking. It's like, yeah. So everything, like my whole body was going weak.
Today's segment is brought to you by GreenBeretChronicles.com. Guys, if you haven't been to the website, check it out. There you'll have access to my Patreon, which has a variety of prep courses geared towards helping you get selected. You'll also have a chance to sign up for the newsletter, guys. We just had an article come out about women in special forces. If you haven't done that already, go check it out. And you'll also have access to the mentorship program, guys. And again, that's GreenBeretChronicles.com, guys. If you haven't done so, go out and
So
check
I
it
know,
out.
like a lot of people, it's, instantly fall apart. And I went into shock. I don't know. I think I drank like 10 gallons of water that night and just checked out.
you know,
Um, yeah, called a friend and just couldn't sleep. I was up all night.
now, once you got word that the incident took place, um, of course, you were told, I would think it was minimal information. How did this whole web of lies unfold? Like, what were you told, and how is that differ than what actually took place, and this big scandal and people getting fired? Like, what was? Because till this day, I'm still trying to figure out like why they did what they did.
Yeah, and I think it was a big CYA, honestly. And I still think there's a lot of things that are, I mean, I don't think I found out the full truth and how deep it went. I do know, and I think this is a huge indicator, is that initially, was it South Africa opened an investigation. And uh, it was, let's see, AFRICOM. So the Three-Star Command opened an investigation. Then AFRICOM came in, shut it down, and opened up their own investigation, right? So when the 4-star command takes over an investigation, it's got to make you wonder.
Mhm.
But I do know that the things I could find out started with those, like the third group commander, and I mean, just who made the calls that day
Mhm.
and were not being punished, really blew my mind in the end when they started blaming guys on the team
Yeah.
who actually nearly died. So what started was I had the third group commander and several others come to my home and basically tell me, listen, this was just basically a run of the mill, mission. We don't have any information. We don't know what happened. We're going to figure it out. Um, you know, no big deal. Well, I would find out. I mean, I don't know how much you want to tell me to like go through each thing, but so it started with that. Then an investigation starts, and as we find out, we'll tell you more. And then I start hearing things in the news of, hey, we got leaks from within the investigation of a team that went rogue and acted like a bunch of cowboys wanting to chase after a terrorist. They wrote a con op, the team captain wrote a con op trying to mislead those higher up the chain of command. And so then, of course, I'm still hearing from the third group commander, yeah, we don't know what happened. It was supposed to be just a regular mission, And so I'm going, oh, wow, that doesn't sound right, though. Like, I know these guys. I know their wives. My husband trusted these guys. And my husband, first of all, would not go rogue. I mean, as I told you, he's someone who he would assess the situation, run the numbers, and I mean, he's not. He was above all else like very principled and could not be convinced to do something stupid or risk his life unnecessarily. So that just when they say they went rogue and acted like cowboys to chase a terrorist, I was like, that doesn't fit his character. It wouldn't happen. Let alone an entire team. I mean, SF teams. You might get one idiot who's, oh yeah, let's do this and but he's probably not going to fit in the team well.
Yeah.
No one's going to respect him, and no one's going to listen to him.
Yeah.
So when I start hearing this, I'm like, well, that's a great thing to sell to the civilian population, but I don't think so. That's not going to happen. So, and I'd known these guys for a couple years at that point, so I knew better. Um, so basically, that's what we start hearing. And I thought, no, we'll go through this whole thing. We'll get to our family brief, and then we'll find out the truth. Well, we get to the family brief, and they basically say the same thing. Oh, the team captain misled those higher up the chain with his con op, blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm like, well, that's great. But at this point, I've talked to enough people that I know it was initially supposed to be a 1-day mission. So I asked them, I'm like, okay, it's a 1-day mission, but you guys pushed them ahead. They got pushed ahead for 2 more pieces. So how many total con ops were there? Well, there were 3, Mrs. Black. Okay. So the team captain wrote the first con op, correct? And they, yeah. So did that cover the entire 3-day mission or 2-day mission? No. Well, no, it could not have. They didn't know they were going further until later on. I said, okay, so the first part of the mission was completed successfully, correctly? Well, yes, but you don't understand. He misled those higher up the chain. And I'm like, right, but he was supposed to be going back to base after that, correct? So they packed for a 1-day mission, prepared for a 1-day mission, had their ammo supply, their water, food supply, everything was for a 1-day mission. The like pre-mission rehearsals they ran were for this 1-day mission. So what I want to know, who created the second con op? Oh, well, that's not relevant. And I said, well, did he create it? Well, no, he could not have. Well, why not? Well, he didn't have the stuff in the field to create the con op. He didn't have a computer. He didn't have this. Okay. Well, then who created it and what did it say? Well, we can't tell you that because, well, it's not relevant and that's redacted and whatever. And I said, okay, well, great. What about that third con op? Who created that third con op? Did Captain Perazini create that con op? Well, no. I said, well, wouldn't that be the one that led directly to the ambush? Well, that's not relevant, Miss Black. Captain Perazini, you'll see, like it will become very clear to you by the end of this. And So it was like, okay, well, this is supposed to be my brief. You're supposed to answer my questions, and these are my questions, and you're just telling me no, and that it'll become clear, and it's not becoming clear. And I finally realized they just aren't going to answer me. And I think the final straw was when my father-in-law was sitting there and he asked them, being an officer, he knew, he goes, so before they got pushed ahead, because initially they did their 1 day mission and then they got stopped in Benghazi and they were told that, hey, this is going to be, uh, we want to turn you around and have you go up to the Mali Niger border and there's a campsite up there and we want you guys to go alone. And Mike Perzini was like, listen, this isn't going to work because it's not safe up there. We can't create a proper blocking position. We don't have a QRF. We don't have Kazakh. We don't have air support. We have nothing. And that's the Wild West of Niger. If you've ever been up there, it's a free fire zone because it's just run by terrorists on motorcycles. And so it's not okay for a team to go up there alone with no backup, no QRF, no support. So they were like, we'll find another team. They were like, you're right, you do need somebody else. So they got Team Arlet involved, who is a heliborne unit up out of Arlet. And so there were supposed to be two teams now, built in Kazbak, and then they were going to fly in as the lead team, and then Brian's team was going to come up and be just the QRF. So that's what the second con-op was created off of. Well, when they turned around, started driving towards the border, and Arlet was supposed to coordinate and come in. Well, they got turned around due to weather. So by the time Brian's team got up there, it was midnight, and they had another 5 hours, and they were supposed to be up there before the sun rose to kind of clear the campsite and surprise any terrorists that were there. Well, they find out at midnight that the other team was canceled. So now they asked to abort the mission and return to base. That request was denied by the battalion commander. And the whole time, I find out that the group commander, third group commander, and the battalion commander is on all the video teleconferencing calls, all the planning, all of this. And they're now making all the decisions. So now Mike Pierzini asked to RTB and abort the mission. Everybody back in the Army agrees. But now the third group commander and the second battalion commander disagree. So the battalion commander orders them ahead and has the rules of engagement read to them. So then they're forced ahead. So my father-in-law's question was, well, was there a second threat assessment run saying that there was no longer a need for a backup team? And they told us, like, the whole room got really quiet. And it was like they had never even thought of that question or thought to look into it. We found out later that the third con-op was missing pieces, right? And so when you do a con-op, and I'm going to get it wrong right now because I don't have my notes with me, but there's different things you put in there. The who, what, when, where, why, how, whatever. And that one of the things they didn't do a second threat assessment. There were several pieces that they missed that just they didn't bother doing properly for that third con-op. But for some reason, that didn't lead to the ambush. There was no fault on the part of the people who put that together, right? So,
Did you guys ever get a answer as to why they pushed the team forward without, one, giving them the proper support, two, making sure that the proper analysis was completed? Because at the end of the day, right, because from the Green Berets perspective of having been there, for starters, putting it all on the captain doesn't have that amount of power, right? Because you have a senior enlisted guy on the team whose sole job is to advise that captain, right? If captain is trying to go rogue and doing his own thing, hey man, there's, at least 8 other guys on the team that can easily put them in a headlock and tell them to sit down and shut up, right? That's just how we operate. So to try to put that on that captain is false, right? He doesn't have the authority, nor the gumption to say, hey, all you big bad Green Berets, shut up, we're doing this anyways. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
So that's completely false. But at the end of the day, we are in the military. And that's why I tell guys, like, yes, we can give them our feedback. But at the end of the day, if commanders say go, like, we have to go, right? Because that's what we
Yeah.
signed up for. And it sucks but we're also expecting our commanders not to put us in that situation, right? To where we have
Right.
to disobey a direct order and possibly lose everything, right? So, hindsight being 2020, I'm sure different calls could have been made, but you never really know until everything has happened, right? Now, how did you feel about that video that came out that showed the actual incident? Like, how were you feeling when you watched that?
So there's two parts to that. I'm I had trouble seeing it. First of all, it being released to the public was completely unacceptable. And I think what people don't realize when they see this is they feel like, we're Americans, we have a right to know, but we have a right to see these things. But because of the way social media works, I had a 9 and 11-year-old at the time who were on YouTube all the time. So what do you think they saw? They got to watch their dad die and see what everybody thought about it.
Yeah.
And there's no way to stop that. Even if I stopped it then, or I could have caught it then, but they were on computers at school, which is where one of them saw it. They would see it on the school bus, other kids showing it to them on phones. They would see it now. People make video games about it. And I know Jeremiah's daughters were teenagers at the time. So you can imagine. And then, it's, I don't know, it's terror. It really is. You are terrorizing the families when you
Yeah.
see it. Now, as far as having that document to see what happened, um, later on, several years down the road, because they do have the full 45-minute video now, and the families have been able to see it. And for me to be able to watch and see, look, Brian did do exactly what I knew. The day I was told that he died, I told my father-in-law, I was like, no, he wasn't killed. He did something, knowing full well that he was probably going to die doing it, but it probably saved somebody else. And that's exactly what the video showed. It actually showed, which was interesting. It was fun. You could see Jeremiah running around yelling like, woo, motherfuckers, I mean, it was like watching the energy, you're going, okay, these guys are having fun. Like, yeah, there's that element of like fear, but adrenaline, and they're having a good time. And they're putting these guys down, but you could also see like, wow, this is becoming serious. This is very overwhelming. The firepower, they were very much outgunned. It was insane, and outmanned. I mean, it was 10-1 easily.
Yeah.
And then there was a point when they were getting ready to throw the red smoke when Jeremiah turns to Brian and says, "Brian, what do we do?" And that's when I realized, oh, okay, he's the senior guy at that truck.
Mhm.
So, because Brian, it was his third deployment as a Green Beret, second with that team. It was Dustin's first deployment as a Green Beret, and then um, Jeremiah had several deployments. I believe he'd had a pretty storied career, but he wasn't a Green Beret, so that fell to Brian. So he turns to Brian and says, "Brian, what do we do?" And Brian says, "I think we need to stay." And then he starts to direct Dustin to drive into a blocking position.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, okay. And Brian had a M320 grenade launcher that he had zeroed in, so it was very accurate. And so I think he knew that at that point the other machine guns had burned up. So the rest of the team was basically just stuck with their sidearms, with their, and so at that point they were in a pretty serious way. And so I think Brian looked at it and said, "This is the only way everybody's getting out, and then we might be able to get out afterwards."
Yeah.
And
Because
so,
even, like watching it, and then seeing it develop. Like I've never been, any prouder to be a Green Beret and to be from that group, because it shows what those guys were doing with what they believed in, which is, taking, the fight head on as it came to them, and then fighting for each other. That's what, till this day, as I watch that video, I'm like, you know what? These guys are fighting for each other. And it's like,
Yeah.
hey, even, after guys were getting shot and guys were dropping, you could see them, grabbing bodies and attending to those guys. There wasn't a selfish bone in any of those guys' bodies. They were fighting to the bitter end for themselves and for each other. Like all four of them were doing what they were supposed to do for the guys next to them. Until this day,
Oh yeah.
like I watch it and I'm like, man, man, this is what it's all about. It's fighting for the guys to your left and fighting to the guys to your right, and making sure that, you give it your all. There was, absolute bravery all around every time I watched that video. And,
Yeah.
from a tactical standpoint, cause like I review it in my head. I'm like, man, what do you do? Like when you're caught in an ambush, you do one or two things, right? You can, try to get out the kill zone, or you turn and burn, meaning you turn towards the enemy and you keep fighting, right? And it's like, it was so long of a stretch, those guys probably would have just died as they were driving, trying to get out of it. And then I replayed in my head, I'm like, man, if I was there, like I would have just, hunker down and just fight, whatever's in front of me, and then let the enemy come towards me. The only thing that sucks is they eventually ran out of ammunition, which, made it a little bit different. But it's like, if I was in that situation, I don't know if I would have handled it any differently, right? I probably would have, hunkered down and then fight in place. So more power to him for doing exactly what he was thought to do, right? Because that's exactly how we train and how we handle certain situations. So now eventually the truth came out, right? Like how, or did you ever get the truth? Did anybody ever come out and say, hey, we're sorry, no shit, this is what happened?
Oh no, no one ever apologized and said we're sorry and this is what happened. I mean, I after speaking with the guys, I figured out enough that I realized, okay, these, here are the players essentially who definitely were involved. I do think AFRICOM was covering a lot for themselves as far as lack of assets provided to the team, lack of like the comms were really bad, you know, vehicles horrible, and these were issues that they knew for years and did nothing to change. So I think there were a lot of things that AFRICOM basically took over the investigation in order to cover for themselves.
Yeah.
But in the end, who made the calls that cost these guys their lives? Third group commander, second battalion commander, and that was really what it came down to. So, and then I found out other things. Like, we talk about it being an ambush, but the reality was they were setting up for an ambush. The team, when they first left, it wasn't an ambush yet. So what they drove out, it was just a few guys popping off shots. And the reason they ended up in the kill zone wasn't because they stopped. What actually happened was that the partner force vehicles, as more shots began to ring out, they panicked. And they were in the lead because partner force vehicles lead in other countries. And so they panicked, put their trucks in reverse. The first one backed right into the first American truck. The other one tried to back around them, clipped them, and ended up, the first American truck got boxed in, and it stopped the whole convoy in the kill zone. So that's what really happened. The captain never ordered them to stop. So they got stuck. They all had to get out the passenger side because now the driver's side door is basically blocked in. And, the captain says, okay, you guys continue, shooting, but I want you to get the trucks worked out. I'm going to take a couple guys. We're going to do a bold flanking maneuver, put the enemy down. Because at that point, they assumed it was a few guys. Well, once he got over there, he saw enemy pouring in. And he was like, every one or two guys I put down, there's 4 or 5 replacing him. And then he began to realize they seem to be very well trained. Yeah. And they're beginning to move in a way to outflank us and trap us on the road. And so that's when, and then trucks start coming in with, there was a mortar, so they had mortars, they had ZPUs and Dishkas and grenade launchers. And that's when he just went, I need to get back to the trucks. We need to get out of here. And the fire at that point was overwhelming. So he got back and there was already one gun burned up. Like they had two mounted machine guns and one of them was already burned up. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Now, were you able to speak to any of the guys from the team at all? The captain, team sergeant, some of the guys that were there with those guys?
Yeah, that's actually how I wrote my book. So I wrote a book on the whole incident, and I interviewed almost all of the surviving team members, and then I interviewed um, Major Alan Van San, who actually lost
Yeah,
his job over the whole
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, he was on paternity leave. He should not have lost his career. He's a great guy, but he did. I interviewed the former SOC Africa commander who had just retired, Don Bolduc. He'd retired just like a month before, so it was interesting to hear from just as far as what that looks like, the situation on the continent of Africa and
Yeah,
assets and all of that, and how they were sharing assets. And that the guys at the time, Captain Perazini had told me that when they had reached the campsite before all of this had occurred, before the ambush and everything, he goes, one big reason we didn't have any assets, he goes, is because we were sharing the only drone. And he goes, it was running out of fuel by the time we got to the campsite. So we knew that we wouldn't have it with us on the way back, which made us completely susceptible. He goes, not that the drone could have done much, but at least there would have been eyes on.
yeah.
And they had to send it. I think there was a motorcycle that started up as they had cleared the campsite, and two guys pushed it out from under a tree and hopped on and rode off. And so he decided, well, it's going to run out of fuel, so I'm just going to send the drone to track those guys and make sure they don't turn around on us. And I found out much later that that was seen. The motorcycle was seen meeting up with several others in the desert, and then they all broke off and went different directions. So I'm assuming that's where the attack started.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I can tell you just from our perspective, like guys were pissed, and that led to guys getting out because again, once you lose trust in the command, then you're like, hey, well, like we're here doing this job at the highest level. We need to have trust in our command. If they don't, if we can't trust them to do right by us, then how can we go into combat and give it 100%, knowing that they might not have our backs, right? So guys were
Yeah.
pissed. Guys were leaving by the boatload, especially the guys that were in country when that took place, that had the ability to react and
Hmm.
weren't allowed to. Those guys were pissed because, and being in the States and hearing that the French had to go get our guys,
Yeah.
that made the SF guys that were in the States pissed because we're like, hey, like we can't go recover our own. Like, what is that all about? Right. So all around, man, guys were pissed. And from what I understand, the group commander, even though he didn't get punished as severely, from what I understand, he did lose his star and got forced out. So
Hmm.
that happened. The battalion commander, I'm not sure about. I don't even know who it was at that
Yeah.
point. But just know that the guys within the regiment, like everybody was pissed all the way around because the last thing we want is to see our own go down in a manner that it did, and
Yeah.
to see it on social media play out like that. Of course, everybody hated those dudes over at I can't remember the name of the guy that first released it, but I know there was a bunch of hatred towards them. SF guy at that from 10th group. And he didn't take it down, of course, so that led to a lot of backlash. So yeah, guys were definitely on the side of 3212, and then there was a documentary that was made about the exact cover up, and that shed a lot of light on what actually took place. Also, so until this day, like guys still have like a distrust within the command because that's why our recruiting numbers are so low because guys are not trusting the command like they should because of guys looking out for their careers over looking out for the men. So that's still a thing that's going on, and hopefully it'll get better in the future. But yeah, we definitely understand, and we felt some of the pain that you guys were going through.
Yeah.
Now, from a uh, book perspective, you mentioned that you wrote a book. Where can guys go to find a book, to buy it, to support it in however ways that we
Yeah.
can?
It's honestly, it's everywhere. It came out about 6 months before the documentary. I had actually worked with the team on it. So when I spoke with the team, it was, we were trying to decide, do they work with me? Do they work with the documentary? They ended up trusting me with their story. So it's the only place you can actually get the guy's side of what happened,
Mhm.
which is, kind of unique, I guess. And so that's Amazon or anywhere books are sold. It was actually put out by Penguin Random House. So, and there's an audio book as well. If you're not, if you don't have the time to read, I always listen when I'm working on things. So,
Yeah, I'm an audiobook person, so I'll probably get that version of it. So that's
yeah, in
awesome.
fact, I've got, yeah, I'm a big, audio is great. This is the hardback.
Mhm.
The paperback has, I don't know, something different on it. It's
Okay,
it's a picture of the team. So yeah.
I got you. Well, that's awesome. So now, if folks want to get a hold of you, they want to reach out, where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram. That's usually the easiest place to find me. Just I think it's Michele Black 71. And that I put a lot of pictures of the team up and Brian and what I'm doing now. Like I'll be out if I don't know if anybody's going out to MCon next week for or I guess it's this weekend.
In
I'll be
Vegas?
there speaking.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, for Veterans Day. So that'll be in Las Vegas. So I go out and do things like that, or yeah, just kind of. Um, I tend to track it and put it on Instagram like you do. So anyway, yeah, Instagram's the place.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, I definitely want to let like all the stuff that happened, it wasn't what third group is all about. So hopefully, that one specific individual or two individuals that made those calls haven't led you to see third group in any bad light. We are definitely 100% behind uh, someone first class black and yourself, and we know what it takes to be a Green Beret, and we are proud to call him, a brother. So hopefully, that those two individuals that deceived you haven't changed the way that you see the group as a whole.
Yeah, no, not at all. I've had non like since that time, it's been nothing but good experiences, and I think for me, it was heartbreaking to watch not, I mean, yeah, it's hard to watch how it affected me and Brian's parents and the other families, but honestly, to watch the way it affected the guys when they came home. And that was part of the reason why I started the book. I think it was actually, I know exactly when it was the day that there was a like a media brief, and the general of AFRICOM stated that all teams on the continent of Africa were performing optimally, but this team was not indicative of what special operators do, and that they were going to go after and punish these guys with the full force that they could. And that's when I realized, okay, these guys, they came back and their attitude was to come and apologize to me, which I was like, you can't apologize to me, you just survived, and Brian made that choice, and you're all adults. And I know you would choose to die for him, and he chose to die for you, so you don't get to apologize to me, because I could just see that they were just as broken as I was, over what happened.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it's
so to like see that they were now going to be punished on top of, they were, a lot of them were in like they were just, physically, they were, a lot of them had gunshot wounds and were recovering, but then mentally, emotionally, like the whole thing. And then to see, no, now we're going to look into bringing, an Article 15.6 against them. That's when I snapped and I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book. Do you guys trust me? And we're going to go after these guys. And, I felt bad because in the beginning, I didn't want anyone punished.
Yeah.
And I saw nothing wrong with these leaders. Third group leader, the battalion commander, they were great. But the minute they thought that their career mattered more than my husband's life and these guys' lives, I was like, you know what? I'm going to burn it down because
Yeah.
these guys need someone to fight for them. And I'm the only one in a position who can.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where that started.
But I definitely appreciate you taking on that fight because, again, when careers become more important than the men, then that's when those guys don't need to be in leadership positions. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that they were pushed out the way that they were. So, again, Michele, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me and sharing this story. Um, like I said, I'm learning a lot of things that I didn't know about the situation itself. I just know there was a cover up and I knew what took place to an extent, but it's enlightening hearing it from you. And I'm definitely going to grab me a copy of that book and hear those guys' stories, which I reached out to them. I was like, hey, man, come tell the story because I know a couple of them. But
Yeah.
they just want to let the incident be what it was and keep it where it's at and not bring any additional light to it. But like I said, I appreciate you coming on and taking the time out of your day to share this with me. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I know they're at a point where they want to move on. And I told them at that, when it initially started, I said, just put everything on me and I'll handle it. I'll get the story out. I'll spread it out and acquit you guys of all the guilt or whatever in the light of the public. But yeah, so I know they're ready to just be done with it. And I get that.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you, Michele. Whatever you need from us, I still have friends back at third group. If I can help in any way, shape, or form, please let me know. Again, I appreciate you coming on, and you enjoy the rest of your day.